Oh, and welcome back to the Late Night Cool Down. I'm your host, Kyle Antoine, and it's a pleasure to have you listening. Today's episode is how to become a failure. And to explore this idea and to explore this perspective, we gotta come to a common ground and a common understanding of what I mean by failure. So the typical perspective on what failure looks like is not having a formal education, not being financially secure, or even not being financially wealthy or successful, not being in a partnership or relationship, or not having, a lot of people on your roster. This is like the modern perspective on what a failure looks like. And I want to be clear that's not my perspective. So I define failure as not happy with your life, or you're ungrateful, no dreams or goals you are going after, so laziness and inambition, being a shitty person, being jealous or envious of others, and having a lack of humility and humanity. Also having an unhealthy or unchecked ego, and a feeling that you are better than or holier than thou. And that is also a lack of respect, empathy, and compassion for your fellow man. And by man, I mean human. Also an attitude of indifference, having a victim mentality, being pessimistic, and also not being spiritually motivated, understanding, and aware. So lacking self-awareness. And so then, taking my definition of failure and looking at the opposite of, so what is success to me defined as? Being grateful for you, your life, and others in spite of circumstances, having a goal, a dream, a vision that you are actively working towards, and being of love, having grace, being forgiving, having empathy, and being kind towards self, others, and all life. So, being a failure in the modern world, 2026, is essentially not having a direction that you are going towards in life. It's not being connected to self or connected to the greater collective. It's not caring about self or the greater collective. And I look at the perspective as within, so without. So to cultivate empathy, to cultivate understanding, to cultivate spiritual awareness, you must go within yourself. You got to look within yourself. To have love and compassion for others, I first have to have love and compassion for myself. To have understanding of others' self, or being, spiritually understanding, I have to go and look for that within myself first. To love others, period, I have to love myself, period. To love others, comma, but you know what I mean. So I'm feeling a bit better. I was supposed to upload last night at 10, but I got busy doing stuff. So I'm recording this episode at almost 6 in the morning. I went on a nice walk, and so here we are. I want to say, being a failure, I don't look at failure as having, any monetary attached to it, value attached to it. I don't look at being a failure as not having proper education. I look at a failure as someone who has lost what life is about. And life is about living. Life is about creating. Life is about creating a life worth living. Life is about having connection with other people, having humanity, having a common understanding that we are all human, regardless of what our egos like to attach ourselves to. We're all human. So lacking that basic fundamental understanding of that humanity. And an unhealthy and an unchecked ego is, a barrier to having a successful life. Because you can have thousands, millions, and even billions of dollars and still be a failure. Wow, listen, did you just hear what I said? You can be a billionaire and still be a failure. I'm not going to point out names, but there's plenty of, very rich and wealthy people who have all the money in the world. They can do whatever they want. Yet their kids don't talk to them, or that's just one example. So lacking humility is also a failure. Why? Because humility is not I am less than. Humility is I see things for what they are. I see myself as I am. I see others as they are. Not as they ought to be, not as they should be, not as less than, but as it is. And coming from a place of humility is actually very powerful. Because when, these quote unquote big situations come into our lives, good or bad, and we're going to focus on the negative part. So when a bad situation, it's huge, it's massive, it's a huge mess, and we make it so big in our minds, it becomes almost impossible to handle and to deal with and to respond in an appropriate, proper manner. And so when we can look at things through that prism of humility and see, okay, this isn't a big situation. This may not even be a bad or a negative situation. This is just a situation that's not ideal, and I need to handle it in the best possible way that I can. So when we stop making mountains out of molehills, or we're making mountains into molehills, and we just see things for what they are. Oh, I got broken up with. Okay, that's a shitty situation. Let's take a step back. From the spiritual standpoint, that's just a situation. The human mind and body, feels a certain way, and it makes us feel like it's so big because our emotions are intense. We're sentient creatures. That means we're conscious feeling creatures. And we don't always like to feel in general, let alone these, big, strong, intense emotions. But we can be humble and understand that this isn't the end of the road. One person leaving our lives is not the end of the road. We are so much more than just who we are around and who we, come to like or not like. And so coming from a place of, stoicism as well, learning, educating, not just formally, because I do advocate for formal education as well, but if you don't go that path, that doesn't mean you're a failure. But I mean spiritual education, human education, learn about the world we live in. And I'll just add a side note here. The greatest tool our governments and the media and, wealthy and affluent people have to control us is a lack of education. It's a lack of knowing. Because if you don't know any better, you probably won't do any better. And so this is, the sovereign engine as well. The sovereign engine, as I defined on my Substack, is true. That's the way that I am going about my social media. But the sovereign engine is just, true, humble, raw sovereignty. Personal sovereignty in the mind, in the body, in the soul. And also feeling that you are better than others because of one reason or another. People tend, when they have more money, or they have a nice car or cars, or they got a nice house, or they were never homeless or in poverty or addicted to a substance, they tend to feel like they are better than others, and that is a failure. Something went wrong along the line to the point where you are now to make you feel like it's okay to disrespect someone who has less than you materially. And that's just plain wrong. It's plain stupid. Because that holier than thou attitude disconnects you from not just others, but yourself. Because the soul is humble. The soul is loving. The soul is forgiving and graceful, because it understands that we are in the body for a very limited time. In the grand scheme of things, 100, if you're lucky, you get 100 years, or maybe 110 if you're really lucky. Most people get 80. So if we kind of, through the human construct of time, if we look at, a billion years that we're going to be, because eternity is eternity, there's no actual time. But if we look at it that way, 80 years is just a pin in the fucking ocean. Like, it's really nothing. And so you spend your time feeling like you're better than others, and you spend your time looking down upon others. What are you doing? We are at this point in time, humanity and our fellow humans are all we got. And I don't know about you, but I know for me, I want to ensure, to the best of my ability, that people feel seen, heard, and understood, and they're taken care of. We let things of the unhealthy and unchecked ego, money, power, prestige, get in the way of the fundamental parts of who we are. And that's compassion, that's love, that's humility, that's grace, that's understanding. And to allow these very materialistic things, which I don't think are bad. I like material things. I want a nice car. I want a nice house. I want lots of money. Because that allows me the freedom to look, to dress, to be, or not to be, but, to do the things that I want to do, buy the things that I want to buy. Because that's the reality. We live in a monetary world. Or not world, but society. We live in a monetary society. But getting a feeling that you're better than just because you got money, or you got food on the table, or you got a roof over your head, that means that somewhere inside there's a feeling that you are less than others. And to try and make yourself feel better, or to feel like you need to compensate, then you look down on others. And that's just very sick-minded. Like, that's like an unhealthy, unwell person. Being spiritually bankrupt, being like, these are things that don't make you feel good in general and in the long run. Looking down on it just doesn't feel good, unless you're like, an actual psychopath, or just a vindictive person. Because I'm not saying everyone is super loving, and that's okay. But to develop these traits, to develop these values of, if I see a homeless person and I got, millions of dollars, maybe I go buy them some dinner. Maybe I give them $20. That's not a handout. That's ensuring that maybe they live another day. Maybe the kindness that you show another is what keeps them alive tomorrow. That keeps the hope in their hearts burning. We are all we got. At this point in time, we're on what is essentially a rock, hurtling through an infinite, expansive space. And what I do, and what you do, and what others do, will define the time of our lives today and will define our futures of tomorrow. It'll define what our kids and future generations will inherit. And do we want them to inherit a loving and graceful and compassionate world? Or do we want them to inherit a world where it's fend for yourself, everyone's in survival mode, it's a dog-eat-dog world, where nobody trusts each other, where we lose our compassion and our humanity, and we lose our community? Because a community is not a bunch of people living together. A community is a bunch of people living together, working together, helping each other, and ensuring that the neighbor who has kids does not starve, ensuring the homeless man on the street lives another day, and maybe one day he turns his life around. That's what humanity is about. You can have millions of dollars in the account, be financially free, have all the men or the women that you want, but none of it matters if you're disconnected from yourself. And it starts not in the home, in yourself. It starts in your heart. It starts with a question. What am I doing that I could be doing better? From my spiritual perspective, I do not like using terms as good or bad, positive or negative, but the human mind just really gets it when you use terms that describe a good or a bad feeling. That's how we kind of navigate the world. Oh, that feels good, I'm going to do more of that. Or that feels bad, I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to avoid it at all costs. But not everything that feels good is good for you. And not everything that feels bad is bad for you. You know, when you have to step outside of yourself and look at a situation from the other perspective, it can be uncomfortable. When you witness government agents and entities committing human rights violations, it doesn't feel good or comfortable to watch it, but it's something that we got to do. We have to, at the bare minimum, witness and acknowledge the reality that we are living in. Being ignorant of the fire in the house does not negate that the house is on fire. And I do not like to spread fear, and I do not like to spread fear, but we got to understand where we are. And right now, the house is on fire. So instead of ignoring it or delegating it to another person, let's take personal responsibility for the world that we are in and take responsibility to make the change first within ourselves. And that change within ourselves will just naturally reverberate throughout the earth. So let's kind of jump onto the victim mentality. Having an attitude of being a victim and having the mentality that you are a victim in life is going to kill you physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. When you feel like, you got dealt a bad hand at life, or you feel that you are powerless to change, then you are. But if you can ask yourself, what happens if I, do change? What happens if I do hold people in power accountable? What happens if I hold myself accountable? What happens if I set a goal and I achieve that goal? How do I get to that goal? Big things start with little questions. It starts with a thought. That thought becomes a feeling. That feeling manifests. I am big on manifestation. I'm not promoting hocus pocus. I'm not promoting Harry Potter. I'm not promoting, I am promoting personal responsibility. And I'm promoting, and I'm telling you that if you can generate a feeling through a thought around a goal that you have, and you take the right necessary steps towards achieving that goal, the universe will meet you halfway. And if you do the best that you can, you will get the best that you could have gotten. And the universe loves a determined and grateful heart. And it will meet you halfway. And things will open. And life will change. Or you will change. And the way you see life, it'll become like new. You'll be, in other words, reborn. Not through a religious context, through a spiritual one. Life will open up to you as you open up to yourself, as you come from who you truly are. Because I've come to understand that it's less about becoming something different, but getting back to the roots of who you truly are. The important question is not what happens after death, but where we were before birth. I come from the perspective that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. I come from the perspective that we are all one in this universe. It is one thing, one energy. Yin and yang, alpha and omega. Not in a religious context, but in a spiritual one. And the spiritual context of ourselves and the world is not one that can outright 100% be defined. There is an infinite vastness of knowledge and energy and just things in general within ourselves. There's a good quote that goes, if God were to hide anywhere, they would hide inside man, because that's the last place man would look. And when I say man, I don't mean male. I mean humankind, man, our fellow man, mankind, right? I just want to clarify. So having a victim mentality cripples your determination, and it cripples your connection to others. Because when you look at life as happening to you instead of happening through you, you got a big problem on your hands. You become imprisoned within your own beliefs. And whatever you believe to be true will take place. If I believe that I'm this victim in life, if I believe that I don't have the power to change, and I don't have the power to, do the things that I came here to do, then I won't do them. I won't change. It's really that simple. If I have the attitude of a victim, I'm going to be a victim. I'm going to act like a victim. It's going to be poor me, not how can I change? So what is the opposite of victim mentality? The opposite of victim mentality is just a different mentality than a victim mentality. I want to keep things very simple because the mind tends to overcomplicate things. Choose a different mentality. Have a mental shift. And you can create a mental shift through education, whether it's formal or online. Learn. That's one way. The other way, there's not one right way as well, I want to say. But another way is to have a spiritual awakening. And how do you do that? Well, ask the universe. I want a spiritual awakening. Universe, show me, white birds, bring white birds across my path as I go throughout my days. Give me, or you can also even be more general. Universe, I want to know that, let me experience something and that I will know that was you. Whatever, and I say you because humans use human language. We understand things through ourselves. That's why we say, the clock is running. The clock doesn't have legs. But we understand that as we run, we move forward, and time's moving forward. But even then, that concept of time is wrong. Or maybe not wrong, but it is kind of inaccurate to what's really going on. Because let's bring us to the present moment right now. Everything is happening right now. Yes, that means when the dinosaurs, from the human perspective of time, millions of years ago, when the dinosaurs were roaming the earth, yes, even then, that's happening now, right? Everything is happening now. And your power does not lie in yesterday, and your power does not lie in tomorrow. It lies in this moment. It doesn't even lie in today. It lies in this moment. Not the next second, but this moment. You got to find it. Seek and you shall find. Knock and the door shall open. And if it doesn't, it's not your door. That's okay. There's an infinite amount of doors for you to knock on. I want you to come from the perspective of unlimited possibility. That you have this one shot in this life to not get things right or to do things rightly, but to do things in a good and better and productive and healthy way. There is an unlimited possibility for you in this moment. And it's only right here in this moment you'll find it. But you also got to be clear on what it is you're after. Have a vision. Have a goal. Ask yourself, how do I get to my vision? I understand some people do not have a vision, and that's okay. What do you want to do in your life? Not get a job or go to school. Schools and jobs are fine for survival for the meantime, but life is more than just surviving. Life is about living. Life is about having a life worth living. And if you don't have a quote-unquote life worth living, get more grateful. And then get determined to create a life that you just naturally want to live. What would you do if anything was possible? What would you do? And then go do that. You may not become a millionaire overnight. You may not become a very successful podcaster overnight. You may not become a successful musician. You may not be prestigious in your career or your goal career overnight. But you're never going to get there if you do not start right now in this moment. Look at your vision. Look at your goal. Fit body. I'm just going to use my own example. Fit body, nice ass, millions in the bank account, one of world's #1 podcast, or at least one of them, top 5, top 3. Singer, actor, producing movies and stuff. So how do I get there? Well, I gotta be up early. I missed last night. I gotta stop missing when I say I'm gonna release. That'd be one. The other thing would be, since I didn't record last night, I gotta record this morning and make sure that this episode gets released at least on some semblance of the same time frame. Maybe I got to get more disciplined with my spending. Got to be a bit more frugal. Maybe it's registering your business. Maybe it's taking a chance on yourself, because there's not just one way things will go. And as you go towards your vision, things are going to change. Things aren't going to go to plan, and that's okay. Be adaptable. There's a good analogy for this, and it's when you miss a turn, when you're driving your car and you miss a turn, Google Maps doesn't, start freaking out and having an anxiety attack or become pessimistic or start blaming others or life circumstance or whatever. It finds a different route to the destination. And that's all it is. When things come up in your life, it just means that you're changing routes. The destination remains the same. The end goal, the vision stays the same. But how you're getting there kind of changes. And that's just life. It would be boring if you set a goal, a big long-term goal, and you just get it right away. What's the point in that? I come from the perspective that life is not just to be lived, but it's also to learn. Life's a school. Earth is a school from the spiritual context, from my spiritual perspective. What is the lesson here? What are you learning? Is your only goal to make money? Is your only goal to be famous? Or do you have, deeper motives? And those deeper motives might not be bad, or, quote unquote bad or quote unquote good, but they might not be healthy or unhealthy. And I tend to look at things, is it healthy for me or is it unhealthy for me? I want to be rich and successful and famous, not because I want the richness, because if I didn't need the money to live the life that I want to live, then I wouldn't, want the money, right? I want the money to live. I want to go travel. I want to have a nice car, or a car in general at this point in time. I want to retire my nan. These are things that I want to do. And when you pray, I learned this. When you pray, be specific. If you want to retire your grandma, pray to retire your grandma. And that she's healthy and alive still. Be specific, right? And I'll tell you a little story. So, on prayer. So, I prayed for $1 million this one day. I was like, God, I just want $1 million. Come on. I was at Park Royal in West Vancouver. It's this, nice big mall. And I was, manifesting, acting as if. So I was practicing, if I had the money, I would just go, you'd go into stores and you'd be natural. It'd be cool, right? So that's what I did. So then after leaving, I was like, God, I just want $1 million, not connected to any, just things that, $1 million I can spend on whatever I want. So then maybe a few days later, I'm going to a meeting, an AA meeting, and I end up at a mall, and I walk, and so I start being intuitively guided, and so my intuition was okay, go inside the mall. I go in the mall, and then it's go up the stairs. So I go up the stairs, and then it's make a right, and so I make a right, and then there's a man sitting there on his laptop with a sign propped up against it, and it says, "Ask me about Jesus and ask me to pray for you." And so I was going to walk past him, but I'm wait, that's definitely what I was supposed to find. And so I sit down and I talk to him, and I share some of my story and he shares some of his, and then I tell him what I want him to pray about for me to Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, my Lord and Savior. I had this card, and it was a Baby Jesus of Prague card. It was the same material as a credit card, plastic. And so then on the back was this prayer. And so I was intuitively guided to hand it over to him and to give it to him. And I did. And then he pulls out this book. He's like, I got something for you. And he pulls out this very thin book with a leather cover on it. And he's flipping through it, and it looks like there's $100 bill in there. And so I'm like, hey, do you want the $100 bill? And he's like, it's not real money. I'm like, oh, okay. And so the book he gave me was, the story and life of Jesus of Nazareth. And that bookmark was $1 million bill. It was fake, but, but it was and so that's a cool little story. Be specific. And so then the next topic I want to talk about, what a failure is being pessimistic. Your feelings, so you don't manifest your feelings per se. You don't manifest your thoughts per se. You manifest who you are and who you're being. So if you're being a shitty fucking person, You're gonna that's what, like, the outside is a mirror to what's going on inside. As within, so without. That's how that's from my perspective. That's how reality works, right? So if we understand that, if I'm angry inside and I'm like choosing to be angry, and I'm like, everything's just making me more angry. I stub my toe and that makes me angry, and then I start lashing out at people and then they get angry with me. Like, if I, feeling and having emotions is healthy and okay, but it's what we choose to stay in is what really matters. Because if I choose to stay angry, I'm going to attract and manifest things that are going to make me even more angrier. But if I pause, I take a deep breath, I settle down, I calm down, and maybe have some tea or water, I emotionally regulate myself, and I can let it go, and hey, that happened, but let's let it go. We gotta keep moving forward. Then I'm going to attract things that are of that nature. I'm going to attract things that calm me down. Okay, I was angry, now I'm calm. Oh, someone gives me a nice compliment. Someone smiles at me. Or I get a little wink from the universe, right? Things will manifest. So if you come from the perspective of pessimism, and so what is pessimism? Pessimism is essentially a belief that everything is negative. You focus on the negative. You are negative. Everybody's negative. Everything's out to get you, or things of that nature. And so if I come from a pessimistic point of view and I treat things like the negative, the worst is always going to happen, and people are always bad, and not, you don't see things for what they are, you don't have that humility, then that's what I'm going to experience. That's what I'm going to create for myself in my life. And so I just want to put a little, dot right here. So manifestation is what you bring into your reality through your own energy. Prayer is calling upon something higher than yourself or bigger than yourself. And that power helps you to bring about something that you want in your life or for the collective, right? Because we're all interconnected. So what I manifest, what I bring in for myself, that's going to be affecting people around me and the greater collective as a whole, right? So do I want to be a positive force, a loving force in the world, or do I want to be a hateful force in the world? That's the choice. That's what it really boils down to. Because personal responsibility is also understanding that my actions, my decisions in life affect the 8 billion plus collective on Earth, but also the immediate people, my immediate community around me. If I go outside today and I choose to be angry, or I choose to look at people in a negative way, I'm having a negative impact on the people around me. If I choose to be maybe more graceful, more forgiving, more understanding, then I am a positive impact on the people and the collective around me. So what does spiritually motivated mean? That means that, what is spirituality? So I look at it as I am a spiritual being having this human experience, not a human being having a spiritual experience. And your spirituality is and may look different to mine. But the fundamental of it is this. We are eternal beings in a temporary body. Consciousness, awareness. And so I kind of look at it as, your consciousness as almost this pure white ball. And that pure white ball is put in the human body. And then in the human body, you have that layer, a blanket over it, right? And so actually, let's look at it like this way. So imagine you're this lamp, this bright light bulb in the middle of a dark room, and you're born into the body, and we put a blanket over the light. And then as you are in your early childhood, what you learn and get from your parents are other blankets. So maybe that's their religious or spiritual beliefs. Maybe that's that's your conception of the world we live in. That's your human perspective and your understanding of yourself and others. And those are more blankets put over the light. And then as you get into your teenage years and you get into more complex social groups and situations and experiences, those are more blankets, social blankets over the light. And then maybe as an adult, the education blanket goes over and the science blanket goes over. I'm not saying these are bad things. I think, spirituality can coincide and does coincide with education and science. I don't think that it's one or the other. I think, all of these things can coexist, right? But the analogy is who you truly are is covered in all these blankets. And so what a spiritual awakening really is just removing all of these blankets that were placed on you. It's about remembering who you are. You got to remember to remember. And that's the little, paradoxical trick going on. How can you remember something that you forgot? Well, maybe it comes in the form of an inkling, or a feeling, or an experience, or it's something that someone said, or it's something that you read, or that you heard online. Maybe it's my voice telling you that this is out there, this is possible. And so spirituality, from at least the human context, is a tool for us to access and to use, but it's also just how we are. Am I Kyle Antoine? Or is that just a name given to me and that I've associated with myself through repetition? Yes, I am in this lifetime Kyle Antoine. That's me. But who are you when no one's around? What do you do? What do you like? Who are you without a name? And then who are you? And then, who are you without a job? Who are you without an education? Who are you without other humans around? Like, in general, like, where do you go when you sleep? Have you ever encountered an unexplainable situation or circumstance that cannot be explained using solely human logic? I have. I know this whole spiritual thing is real, and I know people have, preconceived notions on what spirituality is. But if you're not spiritually aware, how can you comment on something that you not have yet to experience in this life, right? And it really all starts with the question, why did that happen? What was it trying to teach me? What would it mean if I am a spiritual being having a human experience? Is this perspective, even if it's not real, is it beneficial to my way of life? Am I atheist? And I'm not saying that it's wrong to not believe in something. That's totally okay. But I'm saying it's beneficial, and in my views, a success, and therefore a failure if you don't become spiritually aware or not coming from the soul. But it's a success when you awaken and when you get in tune with your true inner self. And that's what really it's about, true inner self. I don't say am hand or am leg. It's my hand, my leg, my body, my brain, not am brain, not am body, because I'm not the body. This is a vessel. This is almost like, you could think of it like a puppet. Some people say skin suit. I think that sounds a bit morbid, and it gives me a kind of like an icky feeling. So I don't say, but this is a vessel. Our soul, it's the temple. There's so many different, religious contexts of what the body actually is. There's the pineal gland, which is said to house the soul. And I cannot awaken you if you're not already awakened. So chances are, if you're listening to this episode, maybe you are. So I'm going to transition into the next topic. And so being indifferent is also a failure. Why? Because if you are indifferent to the suffering of those around you, you have lost your humility and your humanity. And we are human beings, but we have the capacity to disconnect, and we have the capacity to become other or different, or to make others, different or other, And so indifference allows inequality and inequity to go on in our world, in our communities. Indifference is, I can watch someone suffering and it doesn't matter because it's not affecting me, so it doesn't matter. When in reality, and the truth of the matter is, if someone else is poor, hungry, starving, unjustly imprisoned, then I am not truly free. I am not truly satiated because someone else is going without. In a world that's so abundant, in a world so full of possibility, there is still someone dying of starvation somewhere. Not just in some unknown, faraway country, but here at home. Canada is the most educated country in the world, one of the richest nations in the world. And yet, we still not have found a solution, a way of living, a way of thinking that encapsulates everybody as one, working together, working in harmony, making sure our neighbor doesn't starve. And I don't just mean our houses, like the next door house, but I mean the guy who sleeps on the bench. If I have money, if I see someone cold, am I going to go get them a coat or get them a blanket? Or am I going to, let them, potentially, freeze to death? Because that's the reality of people who live on the streets. And I can guarantee you that people on the streets do not want to be there. Maybe their perspective, maybe their mind is, damaged or distorted due to maybe head trauma in general, substance abuse. But that doesn't make them any less worthy and deserving of at least having their basic needs met. And that's food, water, and shelter, and connection. I don't believe in, living someone else's life for them, but I do believe in having tools and resources for people to access when and if they are ready to get themselves back on their feet. That's what humanity is about. And so let's go back to success. It's being grateful for you, your life, and others in spite of circumstances. Not despite, not, okay, I'm going to be grateful, fuck the problems. No, it's in spite of the adversity that we face in our lives, we are still grateful. And where does that gratitude come from? It comes from our spiritual perspective. At least for me, it comes from my spiritual perspective that I chose to be here. I chose to live this life. And when you are grateful, everything that you have right now becomes enough. It's also an ego dampener. Because in the human body, our ego is our ego. We're going to have ego. We're human. That's an innate function or mechanism of our brain. It's a survival and a defense mechanism developed through survival. Because we are community creatures. We are tribal creatures. We thrive with other humans. Why? I don't necessarily know, but we do. And that's the important thing. We do. I forgot where I was going with that. But being grateful also unlocks, your manifestation power. And by power, I don't mean power over others. I mean power over yourself and your life. Having the power to go after your goals and your visions. That's what I mean by power. And, being successful is having a goal, a dream, a vision. And I'm not saying you have to think big, as in you got to be a billionaire and you got to be the most. And if those are your goals, very well, great. But even having the goal of, okay, I'm going to hit the gym maybe once or twice a week. And maybe that once or twice a week turns into 5 days a week. Maybe that, then now you're on the trajectory to having the body that you want. Instead of sitting in victim mentality or pessimism, you are taking actionable steps that are going to mean something down the line. Because as we get older and as, life goes on, life goes on. It's going to go on whether you sit on the couch, lazy as fuck, eating chips, which is fine if you want to do that. If that's your prerogative, power to you. I'm not judging. But I'm saying, if your goal is to get fit, if you're the type of person to be like, new year, new me, I'm going to start going to the gym. No, start right now. There's only right now. You are delusional if you think that waiting until the next second or the next day or the next new year to start working on your goals is going to change your life. That's delusional. Let's get back to the present moment. The present moment is not just a time, it's a space. This is where the space-time happens. The next second and the last second are time, but the present moment is space-time. This is a space for you to create. What do you want to create? Who do you want to be in this lifetime? And when you can define that, and when you go after that, life just becomes a lot more livable. And I also want to make it clear that I don't believe that it's everybody's purpose to do something big. Some people just want a simple life. And that's perfect. That's good. But if you're listening to this, I'm speaking to someone who's most likely determined, who has a goal, who has a vision, and who maybe needs some, words of encouragement. And it doesn't matter, and I do want to say, it doesn't matter how old or how young you are. You're never too late or too early to start working towards your goals. And I'm not just talking about your goals. I'm talking about, what did you want to do as a kid? Because chances are that's something that you still want to do. I've met, plenty of people who are in their 60s whose passion was music. And, for one reason or another, they chose not to pursue it. And they chose something different. And they always say, I wish I would have done that when I was younger. And then you're like, why didn't you? And then they have all of these excuses. Make no room for excuses. If you don't feel like doing it, just acknowledge, okay, I don't want to do that right now. But don't make an excuse, because that becomes a mentality. The excuse, the victim mentality again. Slightly different, but they're kind of in the same realm. And also, instead of giving yourself an excuse on why you can't, give an excuse on why you can. Don't get so caught up in your whole life that you miss out on today. We live our entire lives within a day, within this moment. What are you going to do? And I also want to, clarify that, the colonization and the colonial perspective is that you must be hardworking and you must be grinding and making money and you must have the nice house and the nice cars. And I don't think that's necessarily right to believe in, that everybody must, be grinding and, it's like, if you are happy, find your happiness. I'm just using these examples because these are things that I want, and these are things that people tend to want. And instead of it being a pipe dream, let's make it an actual goal. How can we get there? How can we get as close to our goal as we can get? How can we become so relentless and determined to achieving our vision that it actually fucking happens? How? And that's a question you got to ask yourself. What kind of life do I want to live, and how am I going to get there? And also, your why, the reason why you are doing it, is going to be fuel to the how, to get to the what, if that makes sense. So I think I've pretty much covered everything that I wanted to cover on how to become a failure. And I want to thank you for listening. I'm feeling a bit better. Season 2 is coming up quick. My first episode will probably release, sometime to mid to late April. I don't want to rush this season. I want it to be good and quality content. Subscribe to my Substack. We are updating it. We're updating the the subscription fees, because I think they're $500 for a year or something, but we're going to update it so it's $10 or $5 a month or something, and that's going to come soon. I'm going to be clipping our the late night cool down episodes so that I can upload them to TikTok and Instagram, so to get more people I like what this guy has to say, because it's the fucking thumbnail is not enough. That doesn't really tell you much. But I am so grateful for you listening right now. I hope you got what you needed today out of this episode, and I wish you best of luck in all of your affairs. And this is me, Kyle Antoine. Make sure you go follow all of our social media accounts. We update Substack real time, and then if I feel like it, then I'll update the other things with real time updates on what's going on. So if I'm supposed to I was supposed to release last night, but I didn't. So I just on Substack an hour after, I was just so it's postponed to 10 p.m. tomorrow, and that's where we're gonna find us. Follow my social media. My Instagram is kyleantoine.official, and then from there, you can go to my link tree and see where else I'm at. We are just getting over sickness, and I'm starting to feel a bit better, so bear with me, but great things are coming, and I am so excited to share them with you. So with that, this has been the Late Night Cool Down. I've been your host, Kyle Antoine, and it was a pleasure speaking with you.